Hello everyone. Today I have just a quick video to share some thoughts responding to an HBR talk on the Honey Badger Radio live streams channel that was released fairly recently. I think it's the most recent one, and it should be the most recent one as of me uploading this video, but they do those fairly often, so that may not be the case. But this would be number 84. And they had a really interesting and overall a very useful and very informative conversation about 49 minutes in regarding circumcision, or as Lauren literally, who is one of the speakers on there, Lauren, she was pointing out it should be called male genital mutilation, which you could also call genital cutting. And they touched upon a number of different issues and made some comparisons that I think were really illuminating and really informative. So overall, this is not a response that's meant to detract from what they say or to really refute them. I just kind of wanted to add, I think, what is a really useful and kind of conspicuously absent dimension to that conversation, if I may so humbly suggest that I can do so. So, one thing Hannah brought up that was really an interesting point was that she likes to refer to the issue simply as genital cutting. And Karen agreed with this point. And their rationale was a pragmatic appeal. It wasn't necessarily that they disagree with a fact-based claim that it's an act of mutilation, but that it's really difficult to get people to really side with you or comprehend what's going on if you use an extremely loaded term like mutilation. And Lauren eventually kind of capitulated to this view. She recognized their point that there is utility in this, but at the same time she didn't really want to back away from this idea that it's actually mutilation. But that was just one part of it. So generally I agree. Calling it infant genital cutting gets the point across. And from kind of an advocacy standpoint, especially if you're going from a pragmatic angle, it makes a lot more sense to refer to it as genital cutting than genital mutilation. Yet at the same time, the act of referring to it in this way from a strategic point of view, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily backing away from the claim that it's mutilation. But then the conversation moved on to a really interesting comparison that Hannah had drawn out. And she started to talk about how dietitians in America, they started to push a diet that was that turns out to be very unscientific and very not helpful, which was the low-fat, kind of high-carb diet, which ended up incorporating a lot of fake sugars and a lot of just stupid bullshit, and ended up compounding a lot of issues. And she compared the issue to the issue of routine infant circumcision or infant genital cutting. And the argument was that kind of the core of this issue has to do with appealing to authority and entrusting medical professionals, and that they can get shit wrong. And this is a really useful perspective for people to understand, just because when you go into the conversation and then you try to depict it as, your parents wronged you in this way that was just so horrific, people really push against that, and they really just can't comprehend it in those terms. Again, it's kind of, I understand the pragmatic appeal to this. However, what was missing was the gendered component. Now, Hannah did suggest that because the male body generally requires more fat and requires more protein, that these misguided approaches to nutrition ended up impacting men more negatively. However, later on in the conversation, as Karen Strawn had brought up, she would often bring up in debates that people make the same sorts of health arguments regarding female genital cutting. And what strikes me is all of these comparisons were on the table, but I don't think anyone quite put it together to realize that one of the things that makes infant male cutting of the infants such a profoundly horrible and sexist thing is the gender dynamic of it, right? Because originally, when they were trying to push circumcision, they were trying to push it on both girls and boys. And the arguments were accepted when it comes to boys and rejected when it comes to girls. In order for Hannah's comparison to really, really, truly mirror what's going on multiple levels with male genital mutilation, in order for that to hold, you would have had to have had kind of this alternative health and diet literature that was focused on women, right? And you'd have to have them present all the same arguments regarding obesity and trying to cut out fat, and for them to accept those arguments when it comes to men, but then reject them when it comes to women out of a heightened care and concern for women. In reality, what happened was they accepted these arguments across the board, applied it to both males and females, and then it ended up affecting males worse. And this distinction is key, right? Because that's a huge component of genital cutting and why it's only done to males. And the reason I wanted to make this video and really spell this out is because the reason I consider this to be the number one men's issue is because if we can tackle this issue and not just solve it, not just prevent it, but actually understand it at the core level and completely uproot it, then the men's rights movement has won. Because at that point, everything else will follow. This is the issue where you have like this total variable control, because we're dealing with male infants. These are people who are at their absolute most vulnerable. Male infants are actually more vulnerable than female infants. They have like a weaker immune system, etc. These are the absolute most vulnerable members of society, subjected to among the most horrific forms of the worst kind of violence that our society considers to be violence and considers to be kinds of violence, like among the worst categories of it. And this is both by a social standard as well as by a physical standard. So in every way, it's really the ultimate and most perfect victimization scenario. And it's not just that people did a moral outsourcing where they appeal to the authority of the medical community and then use that as a way to, throw away any of their personal responsibility. It's the fact that it was particularly done to males. And this gendered component of it, once we understand that and really incorporate that into this understanding of this issue, then that's going to lead to us understanding men's issues in every context, because this is the perfect model for it. This is the one that people really need to confront and really need to tackle in the most correct terms. They had some conversation regarding being evil versus perpetrating evil, and I don't think there was enough of an explanation or enough of an elaboration on the distinction there. The argument is not that parents are evil for engaging in moral outsourcing, even when it's insanely bigoted, as is the case with genital cutting of infants. The issue is that they've perpetrated an extreme evil. You can perpetrate an extreme evil without being evil. I feel like to be evil is to have intention to perpetrate evil, and to consistently perpetrate such evils, and there's a certain level of just either negligence or malevolence involved. The scenario that Karen brings up, which is her boyfriend's mother saying, well, I had just delivered a baby, and the doctor comes to you and delivers it as though it's a matter that's already been settled, and simply asks you, like, when are we doing it? And she gives kind of a quick answer. Now, she's still negligent. She's still not off the hook. She's still engaged in moral outsourcing. And the fact that she outsourced to someone who was evil, I would say the doctors are certainly evil. The doctors have absolutely no excuse. The parents, yeah, a little bit more so of an excuse, but it's not a complete excuse, because parents still should have a basic level of empathy to not cut their children's genitals and to not have someone else do that. And then to outsource that decision morally, whether it's to a medical professional or to your spouse, because your spouse is male or whatever. I think that there's a degree to which that's less bad, that's less evil than doing what these medical professionals do. But it's not a complete justification at all. They've still definitely done something wrong, and I have absolutely no patience for this culture of defending the feelings of parents who made horrifically awful mistakes. And I think that comparing it to the mistake of trusting your doctor and then going on a diet that is actually not only bad, but like the opposite of what you want to do. There's so many reasons that comparison, as useful as it is in some dimensions, in so many other dimensions, it completely falls flat and completely fails. Because these are, health decisions they've made for themselves, for their own bodies. And these were, you could argue, made in good faith. I don't think there's a good faith argument to be made regarding the sexual abuse, the child sexual abuse of infant genital cutting. And I understand that from a pragmatic angle, when you de-escalate the language and de-escalate the conversation to make it seem like it's something that's not as bad as it is, that this can lead more people to be sympathetic and can be practical in certain circumstances. I think that there's ways of employing that method without conceding or admitting that it's not what it literally is. And the only way to make this issue something that's going to really convey the truth of the horror of society's absolute psychotic indifference towards the suffering of men and boys is to never let go of the core issue, the real harm of it. And although there may be kind of a stepping stone situation, ultimately, once we cross that river, once we get to the final conclusion, there's really nothing else to advocate but for that every single medical professional who has ever performed a child cutting, whether it's a ceremony for a religious reason or something practiced in medicine, all these people should be rounded up and put into a death camp and executed. I think that that's the only way to properly, with appropriately reciprocal. It's the only appropriately reciprocal response to the evil that was perpetrated against men and boys. And we need to send that signal in order for people to really send a message that says, for the first time in human history, we're going to care about males. Anything short of that, I think, is it's not enough. It's not enough. I understand that men are going to settle for far less, but from the standpoint of actual justice, yeah, these people should be executed. And not only should there be a law that says they should be executed, it should be applied retroactively. It should apply to people who committed an act that used to be legal. Because there's no excuse for it. You might excuse it, 50%, 60% for some of these parents, but not 100%. And certainly the people who actually carried out the act, every single one of them deserve to die. Thanks for listening.
But she is, when it comes to circumcision, she is very just flippant about it. Flippant. She just doesn't understand. Why? It's just. It's, you know what I mean. And
And why is it an issue? Why is it even an issue? Is what she's saying. Like, I just don't understand what the big deal is.
Yeah, and it's really disgusting to me because in so many other areas, when it comes to when we talk about men's rights and how men are lacking or need help or need assistance, she's right there. She's on point when she talks about veterans. She's on point when it comes to these things. But and I hate the word circumcision because that's not what it is. It is male genital mutilation. Let's call it what the fuck it is. I hate this term circumcision because it kind of neatly tucks it away as something, just cute that just happens. No, it is genital mutilation. And it's time that we go away from this term circumcision. Yes,
I've run into a lot of cut men who feel like you're telling them that they're ruined for life and they can't have a good sex life and they're ugly and that kind of thing if you use the term mutilation. And I can understand that because I have issues with the term female genital mutilation for the same reason. And I personally use the term genital cutting because I think genital cutting gets the point across. That's what's going on. And when you say infant genital cutting, that's enough of a slap in the face to people. Like, what did you just describe? Infant genital what? And that's enough to me that I prefer to use that term rather than anything else. Neonatal genital cutting, childhood genital cutting, because it's when it's done involuntarily to girls, it's done during their childhood. They don't generally do that to adult women during involuntarily. Usually, when an adult woman does it, it's for medical reasons or it's for religious reasons, and she goes and gets it done.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. You know, if yes, mutilation sounds very harsh. Fine, okay, but yes, infant genital cutting, I think hits right at home of you know what the real issue is. This is a baby, an infant. The child is probably still has placental crap on him, you know, and you are hacking away at bits of his body without anesthesia, without his consent. And it's just
agreed. And you get the argument from men, right? That I mean, and I really do side with, with Hannah's, the infant genital cutting thing is absolutely the way it should be handled. Mutilation is a hugely loaded term. And it's not just that these men, and this may be something that they're not expressing, but I can't imagine that they are not thinking it, right? It's not just that it makes them feel like they're ruined for life and this horrible thing that will make them never able to have normal sex or anything, or please a woman or whatever, right? Or enjoy sex as much as they could have. You're telling me that my parents enacted an abuse upon my person, and you are essentially saying that abuse upon my person is of such a grievous nature that you're going to call it something that ugly.
I'm sorry, but I think it is.
Well, yeah, but nobody will think, not only did my parents wrong me, but they wronged me so deeply and so permanently and irreversibly that, now how am I going to look at them? Right.
Yeah,
so I think that's part of it.
Well, this is something that people have to understand. Your parents are just as fallible as any other person on this earth. They made mistakes. Yes, if your parents chose to circumcise you and, now you are of age and you feel that it was wrong, it's not that they were wrong or evil. It doesn't mean that they had evil intentions. They may just not have known. They may not have been informed. It's not that they didn't choose to do harm to you. They just weren't informed. It is harmful. I'm sorry. I'm not backing away from that at all.
Well, that's not, harmful. You don't need to back away from that. But the thing that I would do, and I run into this sometimes, and I talk about something sometimes that sort of is a parallel to it. Back in the 80s, the medical community got this idea that eating fat makes you fat. And if you were overweight, or if you were showing a tendency to become overweight, the first thing they did was put you on a high-carb, fat-free diet. And Of course, that led to an explosion of obesity in the United States, because it's exactly the opposite of what you need to do. You need to have a balanced diet, not a diet that they do an extreme removal of something that is normal and natural to eat in moderation, and an extreme overload of something else that is normal and natural to eat in moderation. And of course, a lot of people, when they went high carb, they didn't eat whole grains and alternative grains from the crappy wheat that we now make our white bread with and stuff. They ate white bread and white tortillas and white pasta and all that other stuff. And so you ended up with this hugely unhealthy diet that became the mainstream diet of Americans. And America's pretty fucking fat now. Well, my family was affected by that. I have family members. There are men in particular in my family, because you can't go low fat without messing up your proteins. And one of the things that I learned when I did some studying of dietary needs, because frankly I couldn't keep prenatal vitamins down and panicked as though women hadn't been having babies for centuries without prenatal vitamins, right? So I got a few books on nutrition and started looking up vitamins and minerals and proteins and who needs what and what, where to get them in normal foods and everything. Men need more protein than women. So men are going to be affected first when it comes to like protein loss. And actually men need more fat than women too. And so they're going to be affected by that as well. And what happened with the men in my family is the metabolic disorders that hit that side of the family started hitting about 10 years earlier. They started having heart attacks and strokes and aneurysms and all kinds of other fat-related, like aneurysms aren't necessarily as fat-related for everybody as they are in my family, but there's a weakness there, and if you're fat, you're more susceptible to that weakness. All of the things that hit you because you're fat hit my family 10 years earlier in that generation, the baby boomer generation. And I've lost uncles, I almost lost my father. My dad has had 2 heart attacks. And this is, I'm pissed as fuck about this. Like they started to figure out that this was not right, and they should have figured it out without having to do a bunch of research. People have been eating a high-fat diet throughout history. Hunter-gatherer means you have to also hunt, right? You have to also be eating animals. And this idea that eating animals is suddenly bad in the 20th century was just incredibly stupid. And well, here we go. My parents took their doctor's advice. Right? My whole family took their doctor's advice. One of the first things we learned when we stopped taking the doctor's advice is don't drink low-fat milk. Don't eat low-fat meat. Don't eat meat that's had the fat removed from it. Don't eat artificially low-fat anything. Don't eat fake sugar. Don't eat all that stuff. So doctors giving bad advice and people taking bad medical advice happened throughout the 20th century. It wasn't just with circumcision. Everybody trusted their doctors. Everybody was told, we were all told, these people are experts. They know better than you. Do what they say or you're going to die. So they come along and they tell you, if you don't circumcise your child, he's going to have all kinds of health problems, urinary tract infections, phimosis, cancer. He's got a better chance of getting cancer. And then after the 90s, they started telling him, oh, your kid's going to get AIDS if you don't circumcise him. Of course, parents are panicked over stuff like this. They're going to do what the doctor says. And it's only been really in the 21st century that it has become a more mainstream thing for people to think, maybe this doctor doesn't know everything. That sounds unreasonable. I'm going to look into this information a little more. I'm going to ask more people. I'm going to ask more doctors. I'm going to do some research on my own. I'm not going to be removing parts of my child's body or adding things to our diet that are fake, or doing any of these other things without being more informed. So the fact that your parents were lied to by the medical community, and you were circumcised as a result because your parents went along with what the doctor said, doesn't make your parents bad people. It makes them
Agreed.
part of the large body of Americans who made that same mistake in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been, I mean, to be fair, you look at the rate of heart attacks and strokes and other fat-related deaths that have happened in the wake of the fat-free fad in medicine. Bad medical advice has killed half a generation.